Hi, I'm Valentina Cross. I'm 30. Last Sunday evening, I walked into the crystal chandeliered ballroom of the Rosewood Country Club in Greenwich Harbor, Connecticut, with my boyfriend Marcus's calloused hand in mine, and a bottle of Dom Perignon 2008 as a peace offering, and walked out 3 hours later watching my father Harrison Cross their fee, heir to the Cross Industries shipping fortune, apologize on his knees in his $8,000 Armani tuxedo in front of 68 of New England's most elite families. My mother, Celeste Pemberton Cross, descendant of Revolutionary War generals and Boston Brahmin royalty, stood speechless for the first time in her perfectly manicured charity gala hosting life. My twin brother, Kingston Cross, Harvard MBA, Goldman Sachs vice president, and the golden boy who'd never heard the word no, watched his arrogance shatter like the Waterford crystal champagne flute he dropped when those three words echoed across the Italian marble dining room. Lieutenant Colonel, sir. Pause. Lean forward slightly. 68 guests at my parents' pearl anniversary, their 30th wedding celebration, witnessed my family's entire social empire implode in real time. Connecticut Senator Patricia Ashford and her husband, federal Judge William Ashford. The Whitfield banking dynasty that had financed half of Manhattan. The Pembroke real estate moguls, who owned more of Martha's Vineyard than the state of Massachusetts. Oil heiresses, pharmaceutical CEOs, tech billionaires, and old money families whose names were carved into university buildings and courthouse foundations across New England. These weren't just wealthy people, these were the people who decided who got to be wealthy, and every single one of them watched my family's carefully constructed world of superiority crumble like a house of cards in a hurricane. Voice becomes more intense. The gasps were audible across the room. Women clutched their pearls, literally clutched their pearls. Men loosened their bow ties like they couldn't breathe. The silence that followed was so thick, you could have cut it with the butter knife from their place setting. But that wasn't even the most shocking part of this story. Direct eye contact with camera, voice drops to almost a whisper. The most shocking part is what they did to him for 2 hours and 47 minutes before they knew. How they systematically, methodically, and deliberately humiliated a man who had spent 12 years defending our country, who had earned the Bronze Star with valor for pulling 3 wounded soldiers from a burning Humvee in Kandahar, who had led classified special operations missions that I'm not even allowed to know the details of, and who carried shrapnel scars from an IED blast that nearly killed him while he was protecting our freedom. Stand up, pace slightly. They treated this American hero like he was some charity case I'd picked up at a roadside diner. They mocked his Midwestern accent, the same voice that had called in airstrikes to save American lives. They dismissed his stories of deployment, the same experiences that had earned him commendations from 4-star generals. They laughed at his Target button-down shirt, while he sat across from men wearing Italian suits that cost more than most people's monthly rent, never knowing that this humble man had briefed Pentagon officials, advised military strategy sessions, and earned the respect of warriors who would follow him into hell, without question. Sit back down, lean forward intensely. They judged him because he drove a 2014 Honda Civic with 140,000 miles on it instead of a German luxury car, not knowing that he sent half his paycheck to support his widowed mother in Nebraska, and had turned down 6-figure defense contractor positions because he preferred honest work with his hands. They sneered when he didn't know which of the 4 forks to use for the Dover Sole course, not understanding that this man had eaten MREs in Afghan caves while planning operations that kept our homeland safe. Voice gets emotional but controlled. Marcus Torres, Staff Sergeant Marcus Torres, when he enlisted at 18, Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Torres when he retired at 30, sat through their mockery with the same quiet dignity he'd shown under enemy fire. He answered their condescending questions with patience. He smiled at their backhanded compliments. He never once raised his voice, never once defended himself, never once pulled rank or credentials. He just sat there, loving me enough to endure their cruelty, strong enough to take their worst, and humble enough never to make them feel small even when they were working overtime to make him feel microscopic. Direct eye contact with camera. What time are you watching this? Are you in your car during your lunch break, eating a sandwich while rich people at your office treat you like you're invisible? Are you in your apartment after working 2 jobs to pay rent while your college friends post vacation photos from places you'll never afford? Are you lying in your childhood bedroom, knowing your family thinks you're not good enough because you chose love over money, passion over prestige, character over connections? Pause, drop a comment below, and tell me about a time someone judged you before they knew your story, because I read every single one, and I want to know who's here with me while I finally expose the people who thought they could measure a hero's worth by his portfolio, instead of his purple heart. Voice turns steel cold. They wanted him gone before the salad course. They wanted me embarrassed, humiliated, and ready to dump this mistake and crawl back to their pre-approved list of trust fund babies, Ivy League legacies, and sons of their country club cronies. They had their sights set on Preston Whitfield IV, yes, the fourth, because apparently being unoriginal is hereditary, whose greatest accomplishment was inheriting his great-grandfather's railroad money, and whose idea of service was serving tennis balls at the club championships. Lean back with a slight smile. Instead, I gave them a masterclass in why you should never ever judge a book by its cover. They thought they knew what power looked like: memberships to exclusive clubs, degrees from schools that cost more than houses, family names that opened doors before you even knocked. They thought power was having senators return your calls, judges remember your donations, and governors attend your dinner parties. Pause for emphasis. They had absolutely no idea they were sitting across from a man who had the personal cell phone numbers of generals, who had been awarded medals by defense secretaries, who had classified clearance levels that would make their political connections look like a child's Rolodex, and whose recommendations could make or break military careers with a single phone call. Voice becomes storytelling tone. But let me back up and tell you how we got here. Because this story doesn't start with that dinner. This story starts with a lifetime of my family, using their wealth and social position like medieval weapons, systematically destroying anyone who dared to step foot in our world without the proper pedigree, bank balance, or bloodline. Settle into chair. I'm the only daughter of Harrison Cross III and Celeste Pemberton Cross. The Cross family made their fortune in shipping during the Industrial Revolution. My great-great-grandfather literally owned the boats that brought immigrants to Ellis Island, which is ironic considering how my family treats anyone they consider beneath them now. The Pemberton side traces back to the Mayflower, because apparently arriving on a disease-ridden wooden ship makes you genetically superior to people whose families came later on much safer vessels. Voice becomes more personal. I grew up in a 47-room mansion in Greenwich Harbor, attended Miss Porter's school where tuition costs more than most people's annual salaries, summered in the Hamptons, wintered in Aspen, and spent spring breaks on our private island in the Caribbean. I had everything money could buy except the one thing I desperately wanted: parents who loved me for who I was, instead of what I represented. See, in families like mine, children aren't people. We're investments. Kingston and I weren't raised, we were groomed. Groomed to carry on the family legacy. Groomed to marry within our social circle. Groomed to produce the next generation of cross heirs, who would continue the tradition of looking down on everyone else from our ivory tower. Voice gets more intense, and for 30 years I watched them use that tower as a sniper's nest, picking off anyone who didn't meet their impossible standards. When I was 16, my best friend Sophia Castellano came to my debutante ball. Sophia's father was a master plumber who owned his own company, employed 12 people, and had worked his way up from nothing to build a solid middle-class life for his family. He was hard-working, honest, and had raised a daughter who was smart, kind, and loyal, everything you'd want in a friend. Voice becomes sad but angry. My mother spent the entire evening making sure everyone knew that Sophia was there out of charity. It's so important for Valentina to understand how the other half lives, she told Mrs. Ashford, within earshot of Sophia. We believe in giving back to the community. She made my best friend feel like a Make-A-Wish recipient, instead of an invited guest. My father was worse. When Sophia's father came to pick her up, dressed in his best suit, probably the nicest thing he owned, my father handed him the valet ticket and a $20 tip, assuming he was the hired help. The humiliation on Mr. Castellano's face when he had to explain that he was there to collect his daughter, not park cars, still haunts me. Sophia never spoke to me again, not because she was angry at me, but because she couldn't bear to be around people who made her feel so small. When I was 22 and finishing my degree at Wellesley, I brought home my college boyfriend, David Chen. David was brilliant, double major in education and mathematics, planning to teach high school in underserved communities because he wanted to make a difference. A difference. His parents had immigrated from Taiwan with nothing but hope and determination. His father worked 3 jobs to put David through school. His mother cleaned office buildings at night to help pay for his books. David was everything I'd been taught to value: intelligent, hardworking, dedicated to service. But he made one fatal mistake in my family's eyes. He chose a profession that helped people instead of accumulating wealth. Shake head. The Christmas dinner massacre of 2016 is still legendary in my family. My father spent the entire meal explaining to David why teaching was a waste of talents, and how he could do so much more with his abilities. My mother kept asking when he planned to grow out of wanting to help children and pursue a real careers like law or finance. Kingston, who was making obscene money manipulating other people's investments, actually said, and I quote, "Those who can, do; those who can't, teach." Those who can't teach become guidance counselors. Voice becomes emotional. David sat through it with grace. I didn't deserve. When dessert came, my mother served him a piece of cake and said, "I hope you enjoy this, dear. It might be the most expensive dessert you ever eat." She was referring to the fact that our pastry chef was flown in from Paris for the holidays. David excused himself to use the restroom and never came back. I found him in the circular driveway, calling an Uber in the December snow because he couldn't bear another minute of their cruelty. That was the last time I saw him. He transferred to a teaching program in California and married a fellow educator who appreciated his heart instead of judging his paycheck. They now run a program for at-risk youth, and from what I see on social media, they're disgustingly happy. Voice gets more intense. When I was 26, my roommate Elena Rodriguez came home with me for Christmas. Elena was working 2 jobs while putting herself through nursing school, waitressing at night, working at a clinic during the day, studying every spare moment. She was the strongest, most determined person I'd ever met, working toward a career saving lives and helping people through their worst moments. My family treated her like the help. They kept asking her to refill their drinks, clear their plates, and fetch things from other rooms. When she politely explained she was a guest, not staff, my mother laughed and said, "Oh, of course, dear. It's just that you move so efficiently, like someone accustomed to service work." Voice becomes angry. Elena spent Christmas morning crying in my bathroom because she'd never been made to feel so worthless in her life. She graduated nursing school with honors, now works in pediatric oncology saving children's lives, and refuses to be in the same room with my family. Can you blame her? For 14 years I watched this pattern repeat. Anyone I cared about who didn't meet their standards of bloodline and bank balance got the full Greenwich Harbor treatment: polite smiles hiding razor-sharp cruelty, backhanded compliments designed to draw blood, and systematic psychological warfare wrapped in dinner party etiquette. Lean forward. I saw them donate millions to charity galas while treating the servers like subhuman species. I watched them give speeches about American values while mocking veterans who didn't attend Ivy League schools. I observed them claim Christian faith while showing zero compassion for anyone struggling financially. They weaponized their wealth, using money as a measuring stick for human worth. They created elaborate social rituals designed to make outsiders feel excluded and inferior. They perfected the art of making good people feel small while elevating mediocre people with the right last names. Voice becomes more personal, and I was complicit. God help me, I was complicit for years. I made excuses, that's just how they are. They mean well, they're from a different generation. I enabled their cruelty by staying silent, by bringing my friends into their web, by hoping they'd change instead of demanding they do better. Until Marcus. Voice softens. Marcus Torres entered my life 8 months ago, like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. I met him at a coffee shop in Stamford, not Greenwich Harbor, because God forbid I frequent establishments where the baristas don't know my usual order and my father's donation history. I was there because I'd had another panic attack. Another board meeting where I sat silent while cross-industries executives discussed optimizing labor costs, which meant firing people whose families depended on those jobs. Another charity luncheon where women spent more on their handbags than most people earned in a month while discussing helping the less fortunate. Another family dinner where my parents criticized my lifestyle choices while funding my lifestyle with money I'd never earned. Smile slightly. I was shaking in the corner booth trying to remember the breathing techniques my therapist had taught me when this man at the next table quietly slid a glass of water toward me and said, "Hey, you okay? This might help." Most men who approach me want something: access to my family's money, connections to our social circle, or bragging rights about dating across. Marcus just wanted to make sure a stranger was all right. Voice becomes warm. We started talking. Real talking, not the performative conversation I was used to at dinner parties and networking events. He told me he'd recently left the military and was figuring out his next chapter. He was working construction, honest work, he said, building homes for families while he decided whether to pursue his contractor's license or maybe go back to school. He was humble about his service, deflecting when I asked about his deployments. "Just did my job," he'd say. "Nothing special." When people thanked him for his service, he'd get uncomfortable, changing the subject to ask about their lives instead. Lean back. For the first time in my adult life, I was talking to someone who saw me as Valentina, not Harrison Cross's daughter, or the Cross Industries heiress. He didn't know about the trust fund, the family business, or the social connections. He just knew I was someone who seemed sad and needed a friend. We talked for 3 hours that first day. About books, he loved military history and biographies of leaders. About travel, he'd been places I'd never heard of, seen things I couldn't imagine. About dreams, he wanted to build sustainable housing for veterans transitioning back to civilian life. Voice becomes more emotional. When he walked me to my car, he didn't comment on the BMW or ask about my designer clothes. He just said, "I hope whatever's making you sad gets better. You seem like someone who deserves to be happy." No one had ever said that to me before. Not my parents, not my brother, not my previous boyfriends. No one had ever looked at me and thought I deserved happiness just for existing. Pause. I went back to that coffee shop the next day, hoping to see him again. He was there, reading a paperback copy of Team of Rivals, while eating a sandwich that probably cost less than my morning latte. When he saw me, his entire face lit up like I'd made his day just by existing. That smile, God, that smile could have powered half of Connecticut. Voice gets stronger. Over the next few weeks, I learned that Marcus Torres was unlike anyone I'd ever met. He was genuine in a world of fake people, humble in a culture of narcissism, and kind in an environment of cruelty. He volunteered at a veterans center on weekends, teaching job skills to guys transitioning out of the service. He sent money to his mother in Nebraska every month, never missing a payment even when it meant eating ramen for dinner. When I finally told him about my family's wealth, he didn't change, didn't suddenly become more interested, didn't start suggesting expensive restaurants or asking for favors. If anything, he became more concerned about making sure I was happy, rather than impressed. Voice becomes intense. He was the first man I'd ever met who made me feel like I could be myself instead of the perfect porcelain doll my family had created. When I told him about my anxiety attacks, he didn't suggest I see a therapist discreetly to avoid family embarrassment. He taught me breathing techniques he'd learned in combat situations. When I mentioned feeling trapped by family expectations, he didn't tell me to suck it up for the inheritance. He took me hiking in state parks where my trust fund didn't matter, and my last name meant nothing. Marcus showed me what real strength looked like, not the performative power of my family's social connections, but the quiet confidence of someone who'd been tested in ways most people couldn't imagine, and had emerged with his integrity intact. Lean forward with intensity. The man was a genuine American hero, and my family was about to treat him like trash because he shopped at Target instead of Brooks Brothers. I should have known better. I should have remembered what happened to Sophia, to David, to Elena, to every other person I'd foolishly tried to bring into my family's toxic orbit. But I was in love, and love makes you stupid. Love makes you hope that maybe, just maybe, the people who raised you might surprise you for once, that they might see what you see in someone, that they might choose character over connections, heart over hedge funds, love over lineage. Shake head sadly. I was so incredibly, devastatingly, catastrophically wrong. Voice becomes ominous. The signs were there from the moment I mentioned bringing Marcus to their anniversary celebration. My mother's voice got that particular tone she used when discussing inappropriate behavior, the same voice she'd used when discussing Sophia's father, David's career choice, and Elena's work ethic. "Someone special, darling?" she asked, which was code for someone we've approved. "Very special, mother. His name is Marcus Torres, and I'm excited for you to meet him." The pause lasted exactly 8 seconds. I counted, because silence from Celeste Pemberton Cross was rarer than humility from Kingston. "Torres," she repeated, like she was tasting something unpleasant. "That's Spanish?" His grandparents immigrated from Mexico, but Marcus was born in Nebraska. Another pause. Longer this time. "I see. And what does Mr. Torres do for work?" "He's a veteran who works in construction now." Voice becomes mimicking. "Construction." She said it like I'd told her he collected garbage or performed autopsies.
"How? Industrious."
"Well, I suppose we'll make the best of it." Make the best of it. Like Marcus was a natural disaster they had to weather instead of the man who made their daughter happier than she'd ever been in 30 years of disappointing them. Voice gets angry. "Kingston was worse when I called to tell him." He actually laughed, that obnoxious braying sound he'd made since we were kids whenever he thought something was beneath him. "Construction? Jesus, Val. Are you having some kind of quarter-life crisis? What's next? A motorcycle, and some leather pants." "He's a good man, King. A great man, actually. I'm sure he is. For his tax bracket. Does he at least know which fork to use? Does it matter?" "Everything matters at events like this, Valentina. These people don't just judge you. They judge us. They judge the family. One wrong move from your blue-collar boyfriend, and we're the laughingstock of Greenwich Harbor." Voice becomes cold. My father was the most direct when I told him over lunch at his private club. "Valentina, you understand the importance of this evening. Senator Ashford will be announcing his re-election campaign. The Whitfield family is finalizing their acquisition of 3 more banks. The Pembrokes are launching their new development project on the Cape. This is not merely a family celebration. This is a networking event that will influence Connecticut politics and business for the next decade. I understand, Daddy. Do you? Because bringing someone unsuitable could reflect poorly on all of us. This is not the time for experimentation or rebellion. Experimentation. Rebellion, like falling in love with a genuine human being instead of a trust fund baby, was some kind of phase I'd grow out of once I came to my senses. Lean forward intensely. But I persisted because I believed in Marcus. I believed in us, and somewhere in my naive, optimistic heart, I believed my family might surprise me. I thought maybe for once they'd see past their prejudices and recognize a truly good man when they met one. I was about to learn just how wrong I could be. Voice becomes ominous, because what my family didn't know, what I didn't even fully understand until that night, was that Marcus Torres wasn't just any veteran. He wasn't just any construction worker. He wasn't just any humble man who preferred Walmart to Whole Foods and chose character over cash. Marcus Torres was a decorated Special Forces officer who'd spent 12 years in some of the most classified, dangerous, and strategically important operations our military had ever conducted. He'd led teams through missions I'm still not cleared to know about. He'd saved American lives in ways that would never make the evening news. He'd earned commendations from generals whose endorsements could make senators tremble, and whose disapproval could end political careers. Stand up, Pace. He had the Bronze Star with Valor for combat heroics, the Purple Heart for wounds received in action, the Army Commendation Medal for exceptional service, the Combat Infantry Badge for ground combat operations, and about 15 other medals and ribbons that represented acts of courage and leadership most people couldn't even imagine. Sit back down, lean forward. But more than the decorations, more than the rank, more than the classified clearance levels that made my family's political connections look like a high school student council, Marcus had something they could never buy, inherit, or fake: the respect of warriors. Men who'd served under him would have followed him into hell without hesitation. Officers, who'd worked alongside him, sought his advice on everything from military strategy to personal decisions. Generals who'd never met him knew his reputation and trusted his judgment. Voice becomes quiet but intense, and in 4 hours, my family was going to systematically humiliate this American hero because he didn't know the difference between a salad fork and a dessert spoon. They were going to mock a man who'd risked his life for their freedom because he drove a Honda instead of a Mercedes. They were going to dismiss someone who'd earned the respect of 4-star generals because he didn't summer in Martha's Vineyard. They were going to reveal themselves as the shallow, prejudiced, cruel people I'd spent 3 decades making excuses for, and they were going to do it in front of 68 witnesses who represented the power structure of an entire state. Direct eye contact with camera. They were going to give Marcus and me all the ammunition we'd ever need to show the world who they really were beneath their designer clothes and charity donations and social graces. What they did to him wasn't just disrespectful. It wasn't just rude or inappropriate or embarrassing. What they did was systematic psychological warfare, designed to break down a good man's sense of worth and dignity. It was calculated cruelty disguised as family concern. It was everything that's wrong with people who think money makes them better than everyone else. Voice becomes steel, and when the truth came out, when my father was on his knees apologizing to a man he'd spent the evening treating like dirt, when my mother couldn't speak because she finally understood the magnitude of her mistakes, when my brother's arrogance cracked like thin ice under pressure, I realized this story was about more than just one dinner party gone wrong. This was about justice. This was about karma. This was about every good person who'd ever been made to feel small by people who'd inherited their sense of superiority instead of earning it. Marcus didn't just represent himself that night. He represented every server they'd ignored, every veteran they'd dismissed, every working-class hero they'd looked down on, every immigrant they'd sneered at, every person of character they'd rejected in favor of people with the right connections. Lean back with a slight smile, and justice. Justice was about to be served on their finest china. Direct address to camera. If you've ever been judged by people who think their address makes them better than you, if you've ever been dismissed because of what you do for a living instead of who you are as a person, if you've ever sat at a table where people made you feel invisible, or worthless, or less than, this story is for you. Because what happened next didn't just humble my family, it changed everything. Lean forward with intensity. They wanted a show that night, they got one. Just not the kind they were expecting. Buckle up. This is about to get very, very interesting. The morning of the anniversary dinner, I woke up in Marcus's apartment in Stamford, a modest two-bedroom place he shared with his buddy Jake, another veteran who was studying mechanical engineering on the GI Bill. The apartment was clean but basic, IKEA furniture, a hand-me-down couch from his mother, and walls decorated with exactly three things: his college diploma from the University of Nebraska, a photo of his construction crew after completing a Habitat for Humanity house, and a single framed picture of his military unit that he'd never explained to me in detail. Voice becomes more personal. I'd been staying over more frequently, not because my Greenwich Harbor penthouse wasn't comfortable, but because Marcus's place felt like home in a way my family's mansion never had. There was something peaceful about waking up to the smell of coffee he'd made in a $15 Mr. Coffee machine instead of the imported Italian espresso blend our housekeeper prepared each morning. Something real about sharing a bathroom with toothbrushes that cost $3 instead of having my own marble-tiled suite with fixtures that cost more than most people's cars. Marcus was already awake, sitting at his small kitchen table with a cup of coffee and what looked like blueprints spread out in front of him. He was wearing a plain white t-shirt that had seen better days, jeans with actual worn spots from actual work, and his hair was still messy from sleep. He looked up when he heard me stirring and gave me that smile, the one that made me forget about trust funds and social expectations and everything that was supposedly important in my world. "Morning, beautiful," he said, and I knew he meant it. Not because I looked beautiful, I definitely didn't with yesterday's mascara and bedhead, but because he had this way of seeing me that made me feel beautiful regardless of circumstances. "Good morning," I said, patting over to kiss him. "What are you working on?" "Just looking at some specs for a veteran housing project," he said, gathering up the papers. "Nothing too exciting." Voice becomes more observant. I caught a glimpse of the letterhead before he could stack them completely. Department of Veterans Affairs and what looked like some kind of official seal. But he was already putting them away. Marcus was always modest about his work, deflecting attention from anything that might make him seem impressive. I'd learned not to push when he got that particular look, the one that said some things were private, some experiences weren't for sharing, and some parts of his life were his to keep. "So," he said, changing the subject with the skill of someone practiced at redirecting conversations, "tonight's the big night. You sure you want to put me through the cross-family gauntlet?" I sat down across from him, suddenly feeling the full weight of what I was about to do. "Marcus, I need to prepare you for something. My family, they're not like normal people. They're going to judge you. They're going to try to make you feel small. They're going to say things that are designed to test whether you're good enough for their world." He reached across the table and took my hand. "Val, I've been judged by people before. I've been in situations where people didn't think I belonged. I can handle your parents." Voice becomes urgent. "But you don't understand. They're not just going to be rude. They're going to be systematically cruel. They're going to attack your job, your background, your family, everything about you that doesn't fit their narrow definition of acceptable. And they're going to do it with smiles on their faces, in language so polite that you'll question whether they're actually being hostile or if you're just being oversensitive." Marcus was quiet for a moment, studying my face. How bad could it be? Lean forward intensely. Bad. Really bad. They destroyed my relationship with David by making him feel like his desire to teach children was a character flaw. They humiliated Sophia's father so thoroughly that she couldn't bear to be around me anymore. They treated Elena like hired help until she cried. And Marcus, I love you too much to watch them do that to you. He squeezed my hand. Then why are we going? Voice becomes vulnerable. Because, I paused, trying to articulate something I'd never said out loud. Because I keep hoping that maybe this time will be different. Maybe if they meet someone truly good, someone genuinely worthy of respect, they'll surprise me. Maybe they'll choose to be better people. Marcus looked at me with something that might have been pity. Val, people don't change just because you hope they will. I know, but they're my family. And if I'm going to have a future with you and I really, really want a future with you, then eventually they'll have to accept you. Tonight feels like our chance to show them who you really are. Voice gets softer. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, and I could see him weighing something in his mind. Finally, he said, "Okay, but Val, I need you to promise me something. If it gets too bad, if they cross a line that I can't come back from, you'll let me handle it my way." What does that mean? It means I won't be rude, and I won't embarrass you, but I also won't just sit there and take abuse. Fair? Nod. Fair. What I didn't know then, what I couldn't have known, was that Marcus had been in situations far more hostile than a Connecticut dinner party. He'd been in rooms where the wrong word could start wars, where diplomatic mistakes could cost lives, where reading people correctly was the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. He'd sat across tables from enemy combatants, foreign officials, and hostile interrogators, maintaining his composure under pressures I couldn't even imagine. My family thought they were predators preparing to circle vulnerable prey. They had no idea they were about to tangle with someone who'd been trained to handle psychological warfare at levels they couldn't comprehend. Voice becomes more narrative. We spent the morning together doing normal couple things. Marcus worked on his laptop while I tried on 3 different outfits, each time asking his opinion. He preferred the simplest one, a navy blue dress that my mother would definitely critique as too plain, because, as he said, "You look like yourself in that one." We had lunch at our favorite diner in Stamford, the one where Marcus knew the waitress's name and always left tips that were probably larger than he could afford. We walked through Cove Island Park afterward, talking about everything except the dinner party, and I kept thinking about how easy this was, how natural and comfortable and right it felt to just exist with him. Around 3 o'clock, Marcus said he needed to go home and change. "I want to look my best for your family," he said. "First impressions and all that." Voice becomes concerned. "Marcus, what are you planning to wear?" "I've got a nice shirt and some dress pants. Maybe that tie my mom sent me for Christmas." My heart sank. I could already hear my mother's comments about off-the-rack clothing and Kingston's jokes about Men's Warehouse specials. Would you let me buy you something? Just for tonight?" The look he gave me was complicated. "Val, I appreciate the offer, but I can't afford to look like someone I'm not just to impress your parents. If they can't accept me in my best clothes, then they can't accept me." Voice becomes admiring. And that was Marcus in a nutshell. Integrity over image, authenticity over acceptance, character over costume. He was going to meet my family as himself, take it or leave it. "Besides," he added, with a grin, "I clean up pretty well." Smile. He wasn't wrong. When I picked him up at 6:30 that evening, Marcus Torres took my breath away. He was wearing a light blue button-down shirt that brought out his eyes, dark slacks that fit him perfectly, and that Christmas tie his mother had sent, a simple pattern in navy and silver that was clearly not expensive, but looked distinguished on him. His hair was neatly styled, he'd shaved carefully, and he smelled like the drugstore cologne he always wore that somehow seemed more appealing than the designer fragrances my previous boyfriends had favored. Voice becomes more emotional. but it wasn't the clothes that made him handsome. It was the confidence. Marcus carried himself like a man who knew his own worth, regardless of what other people thought. He moved with the controlled grace of someone who'd been trained to be aware of his surroundings, to assess threats, to project calm authority even in uncertain situations. When he opened the car door for me, because Marcus always opened car doors, pulled out chairs, and practiced the kind of chivalry my generation had supposedly abandoned, he looked me directly in the eyes and said, "Ready to show them what they're getting." Voice becomes determined. Ready, I lied. The drive to Greenwich Harbor took 45 minutes in weekend traffic, and I spent most of it giving Marcus a crash course in navigating my family's social minefield. My father will probably ask about your 5-year plan and your career trajectory. He thinks everyone should have PowerPoint presentations about their life goals. Just be honest about wanting to start your own contracting business. My mother will comment on everything: your clothes, your accent, your handshake, the way you hold your fork. She doesn't mean to be cruel, she just has very specific ideas about how things should be done. Kingston will try to make you feel stupid. He'll drop names of places you haven't been, people you don't know, and experiences you haven't had. Don't take the bait. He's insecure about the fact that he's never accomplished anything that wasn't handed to him. Voice becomes more urgent, and the other guests, they're going to be evaluating you like a job interview. They'll ask what you do, where you're from, where you went to school. They're not making conversation, they're determining whether you're worth their time. Marcus listened to all of this without comment, occasionally nodding, absorbing the information like intelligence briefings I didn't know he was trained to process. Voice gets softer. Finally, as we pulled into the long driveway of the Rosewood Country Club, he turned to me and said, "Val, I need you to understand something. I'm not going to pretend to be someone I'm not. I'm not going to apologize for my background, my job, or my family. If your people can't handle that, it says more about them than it does about me. I know, and I love you for it. Good, because no matter what happens tonight, we're going home together, and tomorrow we're going to wake up and keep building something real. Don't let them make you forget that." Pause. Voice becomes ominous. As we approached the club's entrance, I felt a familiar tightness in my chest, the anxiety that always accompanied family events. But this time it was worse, because the stakes were higher. This wasn't just about enduring another evening of subtle insults and backhanded compliments. This was about the man I loved meeting the people who'd shaped me, and I was terrified of what each group would think of the other. Voice becomes more descriptive. The Rosewood Country Club was exactly the kind of establishment my family preferred: old, exclusive, and intimidating to anyone who didn't belong. Built in 1887 by railroad barons, who wanted a place to conduct business away from their wives and the general public, it had been carefully preserved to maintain its atmosphere of barely concealed elitism. The main building was Georgian Revival architecture, with enough marble, mahogany, and crystal to outfit a small palace. The dining room where the anniversary celebration was being held could seat 200 people for formal dinners, with hand-painted wallpaper depicting fox hunting scenes, oil portraits of long-dead members, and windows overlooking the 18th hole of a golf course that charged more for annual dues than most people earned in salary. Voice becomes more observant. As Marcus and I approached the entrance, I watched him take in the surroundings with the same calm assessment I'd seen when he evaluated construction sites. No visible intimidation, no obvious discomfort, just quiet observation. A man in a tuxedo opened the door for us, with the kind of practiced deference that made it clear he knew exactly who I was, and approximately how much my family had donated to the club's latest renovation fund. "Good evening, Miss Cross," he said with a slight bow. "Your family is already here. May I escort you to the dining room?" "Thank you, James," I replied, because I'd been taught to remember the names of service staff, even if my family treated them like furniture. Voice becomes tenser. As we walked through the mahogany-paneled corridors, past oil paintings of men who'd made their fortunes in industries that no longer existed, I felt Marcus's hand tighten slightly in mine. Not from nerves, I realized, but from solidarity. He was letting me know he was here, he was present, and we were facing this together. The dining room was already half full when we arrived. I recognized most of the faces, the same crowd that attended every major social event in Greenwich Harbor, the same people who'd watched my family humiliate my previous boyfriends, the same audience that would witness whatever happened tonight. Voice becomes more detailed. Senator Patricia Ashford was holding court near the bar, her silver hair perfectly coiffed, her navy suit probably costing more than Marcus's monthly rent. Her husband, federal Judge William Ashford, stood beside her looking distinguished and bored in equal measure. The Whitfield banking family occupied a corner table, 3 generations of inherited wealth wearing their privilege like expensive cologne. The Pembroke real estate dynasty clustered near the windows, discussing their latest acquisition with the casual tone of people buying groceries. And there, in the center of it all, were my parents. Voice becomes more personal. Harrison Cross III stood 6 feet 2 inches tall, and had the kind of presence that commanded attention without effort. Silver hair, steel gray eyes, and a handshake that could crush bones when he wanted to make a point. He was wearing his favorite tuxedo custom-made in London, naturally, and the Patek Philippe watch that had belonged to his grandfather. Everything about him screamed old money, established power, and the kind of confidence that came from never having been told no about anything that mattered. Celeste Pemberton Cross was, as always, a masterpiece of controlled elegance. Her platinum hair was styled in a chignon that probably required 2 hours and a team of professionals. Her pearl necklace, a wedding gift from my father's grandmother, caught the light from the crystal chandeliers. Her burgundy evening gown was clearly couture, and her smile was the kind of weapon that could destroy reputations with surgical precision. Voice becomes more apprehensive. They saw us approaching and both turned with expressions I recognized, polite interest masking careful evaluation. They were about to meet the man who'd captured their daughter's attention, and they were prepared to determine whether he was worthy of their approval or deserving of their destruction. "Darling," my mother called out, extending her arms for air kisses that wouldn't disturb her makeup. "You look lovely. That dress is quaint." Voice becomes mimicking, quaint. Translation: why didn't you wear something that cost more than a car payment? "Mother, father, I'd like you to meet Marcus Torres." "Marcus, these are my parents, Harrison and Celeste Cross." Voice becomes more observational. I watched the introductions with the fascination of an anthropologist studying tribal rituals. My father extended his hand with the kind of firm grip designed to test character, the same handshake he'd used to intimidate business rivals and political opponents for 3 decades. Marcus met it with equal pressure, not trying to prove anything, just responding appropriately to the challenge. "Mr. Torres," my father said, his voice carrying the authority of boardrooms and country clubs. "Valentina tells us you're in construction." "Yes, sir," Marcus replied, his Midwestern accent clear but not apologetic. "I work with a small company that specializes in residential projects. Good, honest work." Voice becomes tenser. I caught the micro-expression that crossed my father's face when Marcus said honest work, a slight tightening around his eyes that suggested he was already categorizing Marcus as someone who worked with his hands instead of his mind, someone who built things instead of owning them, someone who earned wages instead of collecting dividends. My mother's assessment was more subtle but equally damaging. She looked Marcus up and down with the practiced eye of someone who could estimate the cost of clothing within $5 and determine social status within 30 seconds. "How nice," she said, her voice warm enough to pass for genuine interest but cool enough to indicate reservations. "And where did you serve, Marcus? Valentina mentioned you're a veteran." Multiple deployments in Afghanistan, ma'am, mostly in Kandahar province. Voice becomes more observant, another micro-expression from my father, this one slightly more positive. Military service registered as acceptable in his worldview, particularly combat deployment. It was one of the few ways to earn respect in his hierarchy without inheriting it. Afghanistan, he repeated, nodding slowly. Difficult situation over there. What was your role? Marcus hesitated for just a moment, and I realized he was deciding how much to reveal. Infantry, sir. Did my job, came home safe. Nothing too exciting. Voice becomes more knowing. What I didn't understand then was that Marcus was being deliberately modest. Infantry was technically accurate, but wildly understated, like saying the President of the United States was in government work, or that Einstein was good at math. Marcus was giving them the minimum viable truth, not because he was ashamed of his service, but because he'd learned that real warriors didn't need to advertise their credentials to impress civilians. My parents, however, interpreted his modesty as exactly what it appeared to be, a young man from Nebraska who'd served his country honorably, but without particular distinction, who'd returned home to work in construction because it was the best opportunity available to someone with his limited education and background. Voice becomes ominous. They had no idea they were talking to someone who'd briefed generals, led classified operations, and earned decorations that most career officers never achieved. They saw exactly what Marcus wanted them to see, a humble veteran who was grateful for his service and proud of his honest work. And that misunderstanding was about to cost them everything. Voice becomes more narrative. Well, my mother said, her smile becoming more genuine now that she'd established Marcus's place in her social hierarchy. We're so glad you could join us tonight. It's important for families to expand their circles occasionally. Expand their circles. Translation: we're being generous by allowing you into our world. Kingston appeared at that moment, emerging from the bar with a whiskey in his hand and his Harvard MBA attitude fully engaged. My twin brother looked like a younger version of our father. If our father had been raised on privilege instead of earning it, spoiled instead of disciplined, and handed everything instead of working for anything. Voice becomes more critical. The famous Marcus, he said, his voice just loud enough to draw attention from nearby conversations. I've heard so much about you. Construction, right? That must be satisfying work. The way he said satisfying made it sound like a consolation prize, something people did when they couldn't achieve more prestigious careers. It is, Marcus replied evenly. There's something to be said for building things that last, helping families create homes, working with your hands to make something real. Voice becomes more tense. Kingston's smile sharpened. Absolutely. Very grounded, so different from what we're used to in this family. Dad builds companies, Mom builds charitable foundations, I build investment portfolios, but you build actual buildings. How refreshingly literal. The insult was delivered with such smooth precision that it took a moment to register. Kingston had just relegated Marcus to the bottom of some imaginary hierarchy, where physical labor was inherently less valuable than financial manipulation. He'd done it with a smile, in a tone that could pass for complimentary, surrounded by enough qualifiers that Marcus would seem oversensitive if he took offense. Voice becomes more concerned. I felt Marcus's hand tighten in mine again, but when I looked at his face, he was still calm. If anything, he looked slightly amused, like Kingston was a child acting out and deserved patience rather than anger. Someone's got to do the literal work, Marcus said mildly. Can't all be metaphorical. Kingston blinked, clearly not expecting a response that matched his own verbal sophistication. For just a moment, his confident smirk faltered. Voice becomes more ominous. That should have been a warning sign. Marcus Torres wasn't intimidated by verbal sparring, wasn't overwhelmed by social aggression, and wasn't going to be easily dismissed or categorized. He was responding to attacks with the kind of calm precision that suggested experience with much more serious conflicts. But my family interpreted his composure as exactly the opposite, proof that he didn't understand the game they were playing, evidence that he was too simple to recognize sophisticated insults, confirmation that he was exactly the kind of person they could manipulate and dismiss without consequence. Voice becomes darker. They thought they were dealing with someone who didn't belong in their world. They had no idea they were about to discover just how wrong they could be. The dinner was about to begin, and 68 of Connecticut's most elite families were about to witness the systematic humiliation of a man they assumed was beneath them. Lean forward intensely. What they were actually about to witness was the complete destruction of everything my family had built their reputation on. Marcus Torres was about to teach them the difference between inherited privilege and earned respect, and the lesson was going to be brutal. Voice becomes steely. They wanted to judge him by his clothes, his job, and his background. He was about to judge them by their character. Guess who was going to come out ahead in that comparison? For the next 2 hours, I watched my family systematically destroy a man I loved. They mocked his Honda in the valet circle, and they questioned his limited education when he mentioned state school. They smirked when he didn't recognize obscure wine vintages. Kingston made jokes about blue-collar backgrounds loud enough for nearby tables to hear. My mother asked if his family spoke English at home, with that practiced smile that made cruelty seem like curiosity. Voice gets emotional. Marcus took it all. Every insult, every dismissive comment, every calculated attempt to make him feel inferior. He answered their questions politely, ignored their condescension, and never once lost his composure. I watched the man I loved being psychologically dismantled by the people who raised me, and I did nothing to stop it. Pause, voice becomes steel, until Senator Ashford approached our table. Lean forward intensely. Patricia Ashford had been watching our interaction from across the room, and something about Marcus had caught her attention. She walked over during the main course, her expression curious rather than dismissive. "Excuse me," she said to Marcus, "but you look familiar. Did you serve in Afghanistan?" Marcus straightened slightly. "Yes, ma'am, multiple deployments." "What unit?" Voice becomes dramatic, and that's when everything changed. Marcus looked at me, then at my family, then back at the senator. "3rd Special Forces Group, ma'am. Airborne." The senator's eyes widened. "Special Forces? What rank?" My family was still smirking, still assuming this was going nowhere impressive, still confident in their superiority. Marcus hesitated for exactly 3 seconds. Then he looked directly at my father and said the words that ended their world. Pause for maximum effect. "Lieutenant Colonel, ma'am. Retired." Voice explodes with intensity. The silence that followed was nuclear. Senator Ashford's jaw dropped.